Guess how much compute time JGI spends on BLAST every year? Like half, right? Because it's one of these workhorse tools that tells you what a sequence is. This is my, mathematician's interpretation of what biologists do. So it's not entirely accurate, but we do a lot of it. And it is a really important tool. And one thing we do know is we're generating a ton more data. You all are generating data, JGI is generating data. It's all going into SRA. How are you going to find it? If you wanted to, how many people here might want to run BLAST on all of SRA for something? I see some head nodding. I don't see the hands going up, but I see head nodding. I just want everyone else to know that heads are nodding. So yes, so Tom is part of the BLAST team, and he's here to tell us about an awesome new tool called Elastic BLAST that lets you run this in the cloud.
Okay, so thanks. Actually, Kirsten gave most of my first slide, but no, it's great. So I'm going to talk about Elastic BLAST run in the cloud. I also want to kind of make a pitch that something like Elastic BLAST run in the cloud gives you good opportunities for collaboration, and I'll try and demo that too. What do I got it? Okay, so what is BLAST? Okay, not all hands came up, so I got to do this. Okay. It compares the nucleotide DNA query to nucleotide DNA database, translating the nucleotide sequences on the fly as needed. The main thing I guess I want to say here is that we've got a web page, we got command line BLAST, and we got some cloud tools, and among which is Elastic BLAST. And before, see if I can. Is that? Can I get a laser pointer? Oh, somebody else sees control. Oh, Wendy. Okay.
You want the laser?
Yeah, the laser. I can't see it. Laser. Laser. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
You're showing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So laser's the low one there. One.
Laser pointer.
Yeah. Okay. That's it.
Got it?
Cool. That's it. Okay. Great. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm kind of assuming that not everybody in the room has done, or everybody online has worked with the cloud. So I just want to go through some jargon that I'm going to use so that people are kind of know what this is. And so when I say an instance, that basically means a virtual server that you can rent from a cloud vendor. A bucket is cheap space that you can use at the cloud vendor to store files. And this costs on the order of a little more than 2 cents per gigabyte per month. So that's actually pretty cheap. Though it can add up as you get to terabytes. AWS and GCP are cloud vendors. I mentioned these two because Elastic BLAST supports both of these. And there's also the spot and preemptible instances, which are excess capacity at the cloud vendors that you can use to do searches. And I'll talk a little bit about those later on and how Elastic BLAST can help you with those. So, okay. So with Elastic BLAST, we've used some cloud native tools like Kubernetes or Batch at AWS that are supported by the vendors to do a lot of the work. We also, of course, use the cloud buckets that I mentioned to store your files. And we've also written some cloud specific hardware. So that's why I'm kind of saying that it's a cloud native package. Okay. I got a bunch of reasons to use Elastic BLAST, but the main reason is that I'm going to talk about today is it makes it simpler to run BLAST on the cloud. It can handle, from hundreds to millions of queries, and you can run searches at AWS and GCP, two of the main cloud vendors. So I wanted to start out for the first example using a Jupyter notebook, because that's a little bit more fun than like looking at a bunch of command lines. And so for this Jupyter notebook, I'm going to use there's a lag there. Anyway, I'm going to use some data from the supplementary material from this article. And what they had is, in this article by Yuri Wolf and his collaborators, they had some protein fragments that contain an RDRP gene. And this is important, as I understand it, for finding like RNA viruses. And so I talked to Yuri about this. He gave me a little bit of feedback on it. I reformatted one of his files, I assigned taxonomy to the sequences I could, and made a BLAST database. And so it's actually a pretty small database. And so then to use this, what we're going to do is we're going to search a mosquito virome with this database. And so this is using BLASTX. So this is taking the DNA of the mosquito virome, translating into 6 frames, and comparing it to the protein database. And so a few points here. Part of what I want to show you here is how one way to run Elastic Blast, which is to write a configuration file, and you put the information there, and then you feed it to Elastic Blast. And we have pretty good documentation on this, but so a few points. So there's 3 sections. One is the cloud provider, and you see there AWS. One is about the cluster. And so here we're saying we have 1 instance. And then down here is some BLAST specific information. And on top, first thing you see is BLASTX. Take your DNA, translate in 6 frames, and compare it to a protein database. So this is the database I made, and it's in a cloud bucket. And you can see that because the location starts with S3://. And I've uploaded this to AWS. I made it world readable, so anybody can search it, and that's a choice you can make, but this is convenient for sharing with other people. Next is the query files. Again, this is S3://. So that's also an AWS bucket. And this is his gzip file. Elastic Blast knows how to read this. And this is I think some kind of WGS project I downloaded from the NCBI, the mosquito virome. And a few BLAST options here. Okay, and this is the command to run Elastic Blast. And basically what it is just run Elastic Blast, and you're pointing to the configuration file. So you can run this, and this notebook was actually written by Greg Borton in my group. And so he took the BLAST results, he did some of the stuff with pandas data frames to make a histogram of how often a certain query sequence had how often a certain taxonomy had a match in a query sequence. And so he put this all up here. And so this is kind of a nice picture, but maybe you don't like this picture. And that's actually kind of the point I'm trying to make here is if you have a Jupyter notebook, it's kind of easy to write it up, you pass it to a collaborator, and they say, oh, what if I do this? What if I make these changes here? That's good. What if I use this other database or this other query set? And that's easy for them to do. And since you can run this through Elastic Blast, even if they're remote, not at your institution, they could still access the cloud and still do the run in exactly the same manner that you did before. So the other thing is, okay, so the small database, I uploaded it and I ran it on AWS. On my personal account, I went and looked at the Cost Explorer and they told me it cost 10 cents to run. So that was nice. So I took you through a small database that I made myself, a small quick search. And this is, I actually wanted to go a different way here. And so this is DNA versus protein domains. This is using the program called RPS-tblastn, which takes the DNA, translates it in 6 frames, and does like a profile, RPS profile alignment to the protein domain. And it has, so the query set, I wanted something really large. And so it has like 3.4 billion nucleotides. That really is a B. And I brought up, so I wanted to do something that was happening almost in real time with this large set. So I brought up 100 instances, 32 CPUs each, and that gives you 3,200 CPUs, and it all runs in about 2 hours and 15 minutes. And I did some tests. If I were to run it on the same type of instance, one single instance, it would take about 4 days to run. So this is actually nice because you can come in, start a run, and be analyzing the data further that morning. Cost is actually somewhat more than the last one, $270, but it would have been about $54 if you'd done the preemptible. Okay, so the cloud vendors provide some dashboards. You can see what's going on with your clusters. And so these screenshots are from this RPST blast insert I just talked about. And the top one is CPU utilization. And I don't know, I guess you can see, yeah, you can see the letters up here for numbers. That's 100% there. And that means 100% of the cluster. And of course, that depends upon the cluster size. So that's why I put these two on top of each other. And what you see here is we start the cluster, and I guess that's like 9, 10 or whatever. And it looks like just a single node. And it goes along a little bit there. And it starts to ramp up and gets to 100 nodes within about 10 minutes. So you've gone from 0 to 100 in 10 minutes. And down here, you see you've only got a single node for most of this time here. And you see these little spikes. And what this is just the database being downloaded, the software being loaded onto the system. And so it's not really CPU intensive because it's a lot of network. But here you see it start to go up. And it takes a few minutes for it to really get going because the first time through, BLAST needs to read the stuff from disk, really get it into memory. You stay at close to 100% for, was it half an hour? Then it starts to drop off here. And so what's happening here is that actually you've got a lot of nodes and you're running out of work for those nodes to do. And so the nice thing here, though, is that Kubernetes, this is at GCP, and we use Kubernetes for this, they have an autoscaler that recognizes this and starts shutting stuff down because you don't have enough work for your entire cluster. And what's kind of nice here is you see this bump here, right? And I kind of think that's probably because as the cluster size goes down, then your utilization goes up. And at some point, then the utilization drops off, and you get a little bit of stragglers there. But at the same time, you see the cluster size just really drops off there. And so this part here of this entire picture, you don't end up paying for it because the autoscaler has shut this down for you. And this is kind of a, I guess I'll make a pitch for this is a case to use a well-known tool that does work for you. And there's often like a learning curve for that, but it's going to have other features that you may not be able to implement. And there'll be a learning curve, but if you were to write your own scheduler, there'd probably be a lot of work for that too. So, okay, another example, and this is a search of a BLAST-P search, and I've limited it to a okay. And so this is the query is a set of woodchuck proteins from a WGS search, and it's 19 million residues. Actually, this is the only slide where I had the opportunity for a cute fuzzy animal, and I apologize I didn't do that because I would have compared well with the people this morning, but yeah. So my bad. What I've done is I do the search of REST-seq select protein, and the search, I've limited to mouse. And REST-seq select protein is a very well annotated database of mouse, human, and some bacteria, but I only want to see the mouse. And the whole thing ran in 21 minutes, cost about $3.30. And looking at the configuration file, you can see I asked for 8 instances. And down here is actually how I limited the search to woodchuck, to mouse. And so this 10,090 is just the integer specifying mouse in the NCBI taxonomy. And every node in the NCBI taxonomy has an integer associated with it. And so by simply looking that up, so this is mouse, human is 9606. bacteria is 2, and mammalia is something else. So you could look up like mammalia, and it would limit your search to mammalia in a wider search. Okay, so real quick, there's a non-redundant database, a smaller search, and this ran in under an hour. It cost about $2, so that's not too bad. So I want to tell you a little bit about what the steps Elastic Blast is taking while we're doing all this. And this is, of course, all very high level, but so it brings up instances for you. It populates those instances with software and Blast databases. It actually takes your large set of queries and breaks them into batches, and then that's what it queues to these instances. It copies the results to a cloud bucket, and so this is good because it means that when your instance shuts down, your results don't disappear, but they are in this cloud bucket. It doesn't cost much to keep them. And so if you start an Elastic Blast search, it may be done before you, and you go on vacation, and it may be done before you get through TSA, but you are not going to have the instances running for the next 2 weeks while you're in Hawaii or wherever you go to escape this dreadful weather here. So that's the, so Elastic Blast does all that for you. Going a little bit more under the hood, and this is maybe for people more familiar with this, but Kubernetes is what we use on GCP. We use Kubernetes to do a lot of the resource management, which means the queuing and putting the software in the databases, software and databases on the instances, and, and then shutting it all down. We have a containerized version of Blast Plus, a command line suite, because that interacts well with Kubernetes, the GCP software development kit, and of course we use the Google buckets. AWS is similar. We have AWS Batch, and that does the same job as Kubernetes. Again, a containerized version of Blast Plus, and of course this time S3 buckets. Okay, so one thing I've not talked about here is how to select an instance for your search. And the reason for that is because I personally couldn't figure that out myself. And so you go to the vendor, and this is like 400 plus different instance types, and I think this is AWS. And so all kinds of, do you want 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64 CPUs? How much memory do you want? What kinds of disks do you want? What kinds of CPUs do you want? It's all there. But in order to select an instance, you actually have to know what your Blast search needs. And so what we do is we have some metadata in the that's actually produced as a JSON file in the latest version of Blast Plus. And so you could go and just read that JSON if you wanted to yourself. And it says, how much memory do I need for this Blast database? We take that, we add some padding on that, and we say, okay, this is enough for that Blast search. And then we find the smallest instance that will actually run your search. So if you have a small database or a very large one, we can figure out what kind of machine you need. And you can set that manually if you want. Okay, so okay, spot instances, cheaper, between 10 and 20, 100% of full price, usually about 30%. And Elastic Blast can be configured to use these. They're excess capacity, but they're a good thing. Quick Elastic Blast documentation. We have some quick starts for AWS and GCP. So if you look at the documentation, do the quick starts as your first search. And I just want to take time to acknowledge, like, a lot of people worked on this. This is actually my team over here. Christian, Greg, and Victor had done a lot of the work. This is leadership over here. Yep. And we had funding from like the NIH and the STRIDES initiative. And I'd also like to acknowledge the work of Priyanka Ghosh. She didn't make it on here, and she's done a lot of work for the workshop on Thursday and given us a lot of feedback about what didn't work.